Today I'll be talking about sexual propagation primarily and trying to upscale sexual propagation for the purpose of reef restoration. I also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the sea, country, and the land that we work on in Australia and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. And what's really worrying here is that we've been having like back-to-back coral bleaching events, which first happened in 2015 and to 2016, and again in 24 and in 25. So over the past 10 years, we've had 6 mass coral bleaching on the Great Barrier Reef. That's where ARAP comes in. So that's the Reef Restoration and Adaptation Program. This program has been running over the past 5 years now, and I just wanted to mention that no matter what we do, we cannot ignore the mitigation of carbon emissions. So first and foremost, that should be the forefront of what we do. How do we upscale the restoration? Our method involves coral seeding. So our concept takes on the concepts from aerial reforestation. So what we have here is that we have a substrate, and within that substrate we have the seedlings, in our case, which are the coral babies or the recruits, and we have a carrier device which protects the seedlings from any pressures in the initial point of deployment. So beyond that, rather than using divers, which could be very expensive, we developed a concept to release the devices from the surface, and by using smart deployment methods, we target certain areas of the reef that could improve the survival and growth of those corals. This is pretty much a schematic of the procedure. So we, rather than settling larvae directly onto the devices, which could take up a lot of space in the facility, we decouple the settlement phase from the deployment phase. Therefore, we could maximize the space in the facility, which could be expensive, and then assemble the devices with the corals, and we could either have a single species or multiple species on these devices as well, and then deploy them in the field. So the cool thing about this system is that we leave the corals alone in the tanks, and they would simply just spawn in the tank, and we could skim the egg sperm bundles from the surface. And from that, it goes into a harvesting module here. And what we have done is that we could actually fertilize 7 million eggs in 85 liters of water. So it's really highly concentrated. And we've done comparison between the traditional method, which is quite manual, to the automated methods. What we can see is that we could actually get really large fold difference in terms of labor and cost, up to 100 times reduction if you are using the auto-spawning system. And when we compare the success rate in terms of fertilization, the larval culture success, and also settlement, there's no difference between the traditional method and also the auto-spawner method. The next step is to understand when the larvae become competent. So this is a work that's being done by a colleague of mine at AIMS, Dr. Carly Randall. So what you can see on this graph here is that most corals achieve 50% settlement between days 2 and day 6. And some of those coral larvae could actually retain the competency for up to 80 days. So what that informs us is that we could know when precisely to start settling the coral larvae in mass. This is the substrate that we use. We call it the choco sheets. So why we call it the choco sheets? Because it is a flat bit of concrete, but on the other side, it looks like a chocolate block. You know, when you get a chocolate, you can break it up into small pieces, and the pieces, we call them tabs. So what we do is we condition the choco sheets in tanks like this with the CCA, the Titanoderma tessellatum, to establish a nice community of CCA, which develops over 6 to 8 weeks. And once we achieve about 10 to 20%, sometimes a bit more, we freeze them until when they're required. And we know very quickly that the bottleneck of all of this is the assembly of the devices, because once we're talking about hundreds and thousands of these devices, we need automation. So we've been developing robotics as well to assemble the devices. So these are just showing some tests using some robotic arms, and hopefully we'll have the machine ready by early next year. And in terms of surface deployment, this is how it looks in real life. So because the devices are made of ceramic, so it's got a very high density, so it sinks really quite well down into the water column. And it's also very hard. It's like harder than concrete, so the fish actually cannot get to the coral babies. So we've taken all of our technologies and put it into a containerized system, which we call the reef seed. And this is how it looks like in terms of design. And all of the components can be fitted into the two shipping containers, 20-foot shipping containers. So the next steps over the next 3 years is for us to engage in a pilot deployment program. So this is a 3-year program where we're looking at upscaling the methodologies that we have I've described here, and we'll be engaging with industries, so with tourism industries, aquaculture industries, and also indigenous communities, in particular indigenous ranges, to do some of these processes for us. So with that, thank you for your attention and happy for any questions.